Hello, my name is TSHIDI Madia. I'm from Team EWN. I represent the politics desk. I've been going back and forth about whether or not I needed to tell you about Panyaza Lesufi versus Fikile Mbalula. Is it too late? This debate's been raging on for a little bit with the sprinklings of GNU, because that's what seems to be the battle on the surface, with reports about whether or not this is linked to succession. I have my views. All of this, though, is happening as the ANC goes to its NEC this weekend. This weekend's NEC is going to deal with an organizational report and a diagnostics report. The diagnostics report speaks to the state, the health, the well-being of provinces such as, I mentioned all the provinces, but really, KZN and Gauteng. And these two specific provinces matter because there's been so much talk about whether or not they should be disbanded. Do these two get disbanded on account of how they performed in the elections? There's a back and forth, because if that's the case, then the NEC, that's the National Executive Committee, the highest decision-making body in between conferences of the ANC, then also deserves to be disbanded because they've brought the party to 40%. So it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think this diagnostics report that they'll be dealing with will be very interesting because, again, it speaks to how the PECs relate to deployees in the different provinces, the well-being of structures. Do they even exist? I mean, in Gauteng, you'd hear rumors that the parties run through virtual platforms. I keep making a point that in the lead up to elections, our team struggled to find ANC deployees on the ground in Gauteng. I spoke to the ANC's first Deputy Secretary General, Mbalula, this week, who then said to me, truth be told, the ANC's officials carried the party. So that speaks volumes about what NEC members, PEC members were doing on the ground in respective provinces. In fact, I even hear Free State might come under scrutiny at the NEC. Why does this all matter after I've mentioned Fikile Mbalula and Panyaza Lesufi? Because it's not just about disbanding provinces that are dysfunctional, at least for those who want these disbanded or those who want them to be retained. It is about a greater battle. The ANC is very much in succession territory. They'll deny it, they'll call it a non-starter, but there are leaders building treasure chests, if you want to call them that. There are leaders who are lobbying, working the ground in a bid to try and launch a campaign or another. The ANC has something called an NGC, a National General Council, coming up next year. At this particular event, it's a midterm review of how they've done since being elected at NASREC 2.0 in 2022. What happens at that particular event, they will review whether or not they're still on track in implementing ANC policies and resolutions adopted at NASREC 2.0. But what we've seen in the past is the NGC is often used to launch a campaign or another. Think former President Jacob Zuma. He successfully used past NGCs in order to push forward a campaign that ultimately saw him topple former President Thabo Mbeki to take on the ANC in Polokwane. So the way that they've behaved over the years is actually still a factor. Even though they're at 40%, nothing tells me that they'll do anything differently. There are leaders in the ANC who caution against being caught up in the succession battle. Fikile Mbalula penned a 2-pager, 3-pager saying that it's a non-starter. Nomvula Mokonyane agreed. Nomvula Mokonyane asked me, what would they inherit? Are they fighting to inherit a shell? Will they remain divided? They're at 40% of the voter support. That's what they got. And just under, actually, in the 2024 general election. So there is this question about whether or not the ANC can afford to behave the way that it's always behaved. Or does the ANC focus on connecting with the so-called motor forces, going back to communities in order to affirm its place in society, in order to undo some of the lost gains? And I find that that's where they often struggle, like the conflict between what they ought to be versus what they are. I'm struggling to find that the way ANC leaders in private spaces or behind closed doors are behaving differently. I think that they very much behave like they still enjoy majority support. I don't think that they have fully understood that they're a 40% party with greater chances of even doing worse. Again, Nomvula asking, if they're fighting with 2027 in mind, the reality is 2026 is around the corner. The reality is local government is up for grabs. And then if the ANC doesn't focus, it will perform worse. We've seen it go worse from 2016 to 2021. If they don't figure out what the actual crisis is and stop looking for scapegoats like MK Party. The MK Party exists for a reason, right? All of it has got to do with how the party manages itself, what the party has over the years allowed to be okay in the party, but I'm not here for that. I'm trying to speak about succession. Coming back to succession, specifically Panyaza Lesufi and Fikile Mbalula, I do think that there is something that is brewing. A few months ago, I spoke to Panyaza Lesufi. He insisted he's not eyeing national office, he's not eyeing presidency. But if you're watching slowly, quietly, a campaign is being built around Panyaza Lesufi. You need to question, why is a campaign being built? Is Panyaza Lesufi an extension of Paul Mashatile? And I think to some degree, that's what they see. There are people who believe Paul Mashatile's campaign to become president of the ANC is a non-starter itself, that actually it's probably gone before he comes close to it. That's what some people believe. And Gauteng would need to look at who's next. And who's next becomes somebody like Panyaza Lesufi. That somebody others in the ANC will argue is not a national player, he's still a provincial player. But his footprint is far bigger than other provincial players. You can't take away the fact that Gauteng, by nature of what this province is like, one who resides here, who exists here, is able to have a much larger footprint to capture the imagination of so many people outside of Gauteng. Panyaza Lesufi is a suave communicator. People always forget that this person was a communicator. I always say, like, why are you surprised that he's so good at managing media? Because he dealt with media for so long. So I wouldn't be surprised that at some point we see something brewing and actually molding into a thing. What I think he's doing really carefully and very cleverly is speaking out in public against such and such. So the ANC's 100th days of GNU, they call it a reflection, I call it a celebration. At that party that they had, the bash that they had, he was the one who called out those with the posters saying, "Do not kill Chris Hani again." I.e. looking like a leader who says, "Do not do that in my name." So he's posturing very well, right? Because people will want to see who will behave like a statesman. Fikile Mbalula, I think it's an interesting case for me because I often look at Fikile Mbalula and I think there are moments where he does show the character of a true leader. Then there's moments where like he's falling apart and he is unhinged and you don't understand why that's the case, you know. But I do think he's trying to create a particular image of himself. He is the ultimate defender, even more than the president of the ANC, of the GNU. Somebody said, oh, he speaks ill about the GNU. I'm like, no, not Fikile Mbalula. He defends this chapter of the ANC like no other. And I think that's an attempt to look like a leader. But there are mishaps. And part of those mishaps, I think, is because people continue to see him as a youth league Fikile Mbalula. People aren't allowing him to grow up. And at times, he doesn't allow himself to grow up. So I think that who he is and how he's managing this period is weird. Internally, people speak of an insatiable appetite to lead. They call him factional. They say that he's not well placed in the SGU of the ANC. Remember, that's the COO, that's the heartbeat, really. The operations of the organization, saying that he makes decisions that are factionally driven. So I think those are issues that he would have to navigate. But I have to admit that I see what they see. I see Project 2027 in his eyes, and it's very hard to unsee it, and even for him to unsee it. So I don't know if he takes advice. I don't know who's close to him, but I'd imagine that somebody must be saying, don't do that, do this. You know, I don't know. Novula Mokonyane is saying to me recently that even if he does what Kgalema Motlanthe used to do in the Secretariat, because people don't want to unsee Mbalula of Youth League, they cannot see him as anything but. So he's got this thing to navigate, I suppose. His reputation, his public image needs him to still figure out what to do with it, if that makes sense. And I think the bigger question around succession for me is the NC actually has no candidates. That's also why you're seeing this Mangler moves, to be honest with you. And if you're not seeing it, you're not looking hard enough. If you're not feeling it, you're not paying attention. The truth of the matter is there are no clear successors for Cyril Ramaphosa within the party. So everybody kind of sees themselves as a potential leader. And that's why you'll see a massive race to 2027. They'll take each other down. These court matters where you're finding different ANC leaders in court every other week, that actually works for opponents, if you may, because they see that as a process of elimination, that people who are then charged fall out of the race, they become non-factors. But there is a question mark about who is there. Is it a Sputla Ramogopa, is young and dynamic? Is it a generation of people like Fikile Mbalula, or even a younger generation? Somebody said to me, it's got to be a younger generation that takes over the reins, that the conversation cannot continue to be around people like Zweli Mkhize and Gwede Mantashe. Like those people are spent forces, that the ANC needs to be infused with young energy. Is that a Zuko Kotlimbi? Is it an outsider? Because what happened in 2012 in Mangawung was that Cyril Ramaphosa, in essence, was an outsider. He wasn't within that particular fold or the race. He was brought in from outside, and he was legitimized by then President Jacob Zuma. He was seen as a non-issue, as a non-threat, if you may. And look at what he's managed to do with that. So there is a question of, does the ANC need an outsider? What does a person inherit? I think for me, that's the constant is, while these skirmishes are happening, and yes, Fikile Mbalula and Panyaza Lesufi, that's a tiny wave of what's actually unfolding in a place where everybody seems to believe that they've got it. I won't even discount the idea of Nomvula Mokonyane being part of the conversations of presidency. Some people might see women playing the role of deputy president. I don't think the women in the ANC are seeing that. They'll have another go. The Women's League wants to have another go. Nomvula Mokonyane has the appetite, I believe. So don't be surprised. Kumbuzo Nchaveni, there's so many. I think Thembi Semelani and Kumbuzo Nchaveni at some point felt to me like people that the president wanted to groom. But Thembi Semelani currently has a cloud over her head. And the thing about clouds over your heads is they seldom clear, at least clear in time for you to salvage something. So I don't know about her. I think there are many names. Oscar Mabuyani, there are many names. People say to you, Oscar is ready to ascend. But again, there's the issue of people who've played provincial politics for too long. Ace Makashule and Didi Mabuza, for me, are an example of why you must never stay in a province for too long, one outside of Gauteng specifically. You'll have a little fiefdom going on. And the national politics don't rapa. National politics are not a walk in the park. But the question of succession, is it a non-starter? I don't agree. I think we are well placed to start talking about succession in the ANC because they are focused on succession.